welcome to the AFCM Leadership Faith Aid for December 2015. My name is Steve Green. I'm the Regional Director for Alberta and BC, and my wife Penny and I pastor Breton Word of Faith Church in Breton, Alberta. Today I'd like to speak about the fulfillment of the Law of Moses, and I have 5 points I would like to share with you. The first point is that everyone, everywhere follows some kind of law, even if it's a law of our own making. So what do we mean by law? In Leviticus chapter 18 and verse 5, God says, "You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, which if a man does, he shall live by them. I am the Lord." The law of Moses says then that if we keep God's statutes and his judgments, then that will make us righteous, functionally righteous, and that righteousness will produce right living, good living, the life of God. So then, in general, a law is a means to an end. It's a means of producing righteousness, functional righteousness in us, and then that functional righteousness produces life, a good result. But Paul says something, though, very interesting in Romans chapter 7 and verse 10. He says, "And the commandment," speaking about the law of Moses, and in particular the 10 Commandments, he says, "The commandment which was to bring life, I found to bring death." And so he explains why he says that. In Romans 8 and verse 3, we read that the law is weak through the flesh. In chapter 10 and verse 3, that it's merely us going about to establish our own righteousness. It is working solely by human effort. We read in chapter 3 and verse 20 that by the law is the knowledge of sin. So this is true of any law that promises life, any law that has this type of intended result, be it Jewish or Gentile, be it religious or unreligious. Any principle or strategy for living is going to operate by human effort, solely by human effort, and therefore it will fail. People sin. In summing up, Paul says in Galatians chapter 3 and verse 21, "For if there had been a law given, any law, which could have given life, truly righteousness would have been by the law of Moses." It was the law that was written by the finger of God in tablets of stone. This would have been the law that would work, but it does not work. Jesus then is the only exception in the universe to the laws of flesh, the laws of human effort. We read in John chapter 1 and verse 17, "For the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ." John goes on to say that Jesus was full of grace and truth. So backing up to Matthew chapter 5 and verse 17, Jesus says, "Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill." Jesus then goes on to give 6 examples from the law of Moses describing what he means by fulfilling the law. In each of these 6 examples, Jesus uses the format, "You have heard that it was said, but I say to you." 2 of these examples are from the 10 Commandments. Now we will look at 2 of the 6 examples. The first one, from the 10 Commandments, Matthew 5, verses 27 to 28. "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not commit adultery.'" That's the 7th of the 10. "But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Jesus gives a second example, this time Matthew 5, verses 38 to 39. "You have heard that it was said, 'An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.' But I tell you not to resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also." So Jesus is explaining fulfillment. Fulfillment of the law means that the law of Moses finds its ultimate intention in him. Jesus personifies the law as God intended it to be. The law as Moses stated it was the law yet unfulfilled. It was a step in the right direction. The law as Jesus stated it is the law fulfilled. It is the ultimate destination. Jesus came not to destroy the law of Moses, but to fulfill it. Notice that in fulfilling the law of Moses, Jesus changes it. Moses said, "An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth," and Jesus says that's no longer the way that it is. So the superior ministry of Jesus, this infusion of grace and truth, changes the law in 2 important ways. First of all, it makes it much more practical, much more beneficial for us. As good as it is that a man would never commit adultery against his wife, it is much better that he would also never even look at a woman to lust after her in his heart. That's the first benefit of the change that Jesus brings. The second benefit is that he gives grace to assist the follower in order to perform the work. He gives the ability, the divine ability to do what he is saying. In the law of Moses, there was no grace. The words of Jesus, then, are the words that we are to obey. That's the third point. In John 6:63, Jesus said, "It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh profits nothing. The words that I speak to you are spirit, and they are life." So when we back up again to Matthew 5 and verse 19, and Jesus says, "Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven," we are not speaking, or Jesus is not speaking there, of the unfulfilled law, but rather he's speaking of the fulfilled law, the law that actually works, the law that's full of grace and truth. Otherwise, we Christian men would all be walking around with the hair from our temples long and curly, and also Jesus himself would be the least in the kingdom of heaven for advising us against the law of Moses, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That's not the way it is anymore. So the fourth point is that the law of Moses has ceased to exist as a means of righteousness or a means of relationship with God. Romans 7 and verse 6 says, "But now we have been delivered from the law, having died to what we were held by, so that we should serve in the newness of the Spirit and not in the oldness of the letter." In 10 and 4, Jesus says, "For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes." So summarizing the point so far, point one, everyone everywhere follows some kind of law. Point number two, Jesus is the only exception to the laws of flesh or human effort. Point three, the words of Jesus then are the words that we are to obey. And point four, the law of Moses has ceased to exist as a means of relationship with God. The fifth and final point is this. Let's look at another example of the law of Moses being fulfilled in the New Testament. In the fourth commandment, we read, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy." In its unfulfilled form, it's talking about one specific day each week from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, abstaining from normal work. Now let's look at the New Testament fulfillment of this law. In Hebrews 3 verses 18 to 19, we read, and to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who did not obey? So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. Concerning the wilderness generation then, the writer says that they did not obey because they did not believe. Faith produces obedience. They did not enter the promised land, the land of rest, because they did not obey. So as we read through chapter 4 of Hebrews, here's what we see. The example of the wilderness generation applies equally to us. We need to have a godly fear, lest by disobedience we also would not enter God's rest. It is the obedience that comes from faith, the obedience to the words of Jesus, that brings us into his rest. This is the New Testament Sabbath rest. It's the reward for doing what Jesus says. It is disobedience to the words of Jesus that keeps us from this rest. We enter the rest by ceasing from our own works, that's the Sabbath, and instead being diligent to follow the words of Jesus. We come to the end of chapter 4, verse 16, and it says, "Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need." So Jesus not only gives us instruction, but he also gives us grace to perform that instruction. So summarizing the fifth point, in the unfulfilled law, the Sabbath rest is not working for one specified day each week. In the fulfilled law, the law of Christ, the Sabbath rest is ceasing from our own works for 7 days a week, in order that we would follow the words of Jesus 7 days a week, in order that we would enjoy the reward that comes from following Christ 7 days a week. This reward is entering the promised land, entering the land of rest. It is enjoying the life of God. I trust that this study of the fulfillment of the law of Moses has been beneficial for you.